You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 203 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden Dale here, joined by Pankaj Bhojwani. As always, this week on the pod, we asked the question, is this an aggro-dominated meta? And is Aurora just the new Viserai? Or is there more than meets the eye post the final week of Road to Nationals results as we head towards Pro Tour London in, checks my calendar, 4 weeks? It's coming around quickly, and we do have some events in between. So, Pankaj, we've got a lot to unpack and get into.
It's creeping up on us, the Pro Tour, and I'm so incredibly hyped. I can't wait. Pro Tour season, it's your first Pro Tour of the year, so far, we speak about how January is when we come out of the lull in the Flesh and Blood season, out of the holiday season, but then the first Pro Tour is where it's a very marked, okay, we are firmly out of it, and we're in the thick of preparing for all these Tier 4 events and Nationals, so I can't wait.
It happens so quick, like it just bolts, right? We've just wrapped up Road to National season, then we're gonna head a Pro Tour, then we're heading a Pro Quest season, then we're heading National season, then we're heading another Pro Tour, and then it just rolls through until the end of the year, basically. Especially if you ever want to dabble in a skirmish season, like you were just straight up rolling. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. This week in Flesh and Blood, I think. What have you been up to? I'd love to know, Pankaj. What have you been playing?
So I had a similar RTN story this past weekend as I did the previous weekend. I went 5-1 in the Swiss rounds for CC. Again, we get big RTNs here, so it was 6 rounds of Swiss. 5-1 in Swiss, and I was locked for second seed going to top 8. And then quarterfinals, paired against a friend who hadn't qualified yet, just gave him the win, walked out of the store. Got my rainbow foil, Cindra this time. Last weekend I got my rainbow foil, Mario. So gonna have more friends in Vegas for Nationals, and that's always gonna be fun. I played Mario Marinette, who continues to serve me well, and I think is a strong deck, and we'll get more into that as we talk about the meta in the main topic. How was your week?
Foreshadowing. Yeah, my week was good. I played a Road to Nationals. As of right now, Pankaj, until they release, I guess, who's qualified on ELO, I am not qualified for Nationals. So
are you in the top 100 ELO for your region?
Yeah.
Surely, right? Okay, so
14th or something, 12th or something in the country. Although I've been bleeding a bit of ELO through this Road to National season.
Oh my god, me too. I've just been an ELO donating machine. I'm kind of just like, hey, okay, my friend hasn't qualified, fine, I'll concede to them. And I'm like, oh, I lost like 1 round, and I lost like so much ELO because of that. Yeah. Even though I like won most of the others. Yeah, I've been ELO beating. But if I were to play in Nationals, I'm pretty sure I still qualify on ELO, so all right, I'm sure. Anyway,
I've only played 2 Road to Nationals this season, to be fair. So it's probably the least amount of Road to Nationals I've played in a season. Just like the first week was the weekend I was like still away post my wedding. I had some other things happening like in my personal life where I just prevented me, not bad things, all good things, but just prevented me from being able to make as many Road to Nationals as I would have liked. So I played 2, but I definitely had a lot of, and it's the first time that I think it's the first season I haven't won a Road to Nationals, let alone like top forward and got my qualification, I guess. So automatically at least. So it was a bit of an odd feeling, I guess. And I really had some reflections. I think, I decided to play Viserai at the first one and lost in top 8. And I think my decision was fine. I decided to play a deck that I really wanted to play, and that was kind of my decision. The second week, I decided to try Viserai as Living Legend. I decided, right, I'm going to pick up a deck that's going to give me a great opportunity to exploit this new meta and to win a Road to Nationals, right? And I sat there and I looked at everything and I was like, Aurora's the best deck. Like, Aurora's just the best deck. I should just play Aurora. But then, me being me, Pankaj, I was like, no.
Dash.
Yeah.
You brought Dash.
No, I didn't.
Oh my god.
I didn't bring Dash, don't worry. But I did sit there and go, okay, what should I play? Like, what is, what's the meta call? And every time that I do this, I think at a tier 4 event, make the like more niche meta call is fine. The meta is generally narrower. Road to Nationals, even at calling level, I think these decisions backfire so often to just not play the best deck or play one of the best decks that has a good angle into the format. I played Prism on the weekend, which I think is like a reasonably well-positioned hero. I talked about it on the pod last week, right? I think it has a good matchup into Aurora. I think all things considered probably should be in a good spot right now. The thing is that the deck just isn't that good. Like, as much as it's better positioned than it was, previously, the hero is just not as powerful as, say, Enigma or Aurora. And if I really wanted to play Illusionist and thought it was a good spot, I probably should have just played Enigma on the weekend, to be honest. The other piece in my learning as well is that when it comes to a new format, it comes to Road to National season, or it comes to just the fact that there's so many more heroes in this environment than there ever has been, knowing your deck inside and out is more valuable than ever before, and how you know how to play against your matchups. And I lost my first round because I just played so badly into Arachne Marionette, despite knowing what that deck does. Just the fact that I hadn't had the reps of Prism specifically into that matchup, I played quite badly and lost a round because of it. So a lot of learnings this past weekend. I should have just played Aurora. It's a deck I've been messing around with, or I guess just Enigma or something that I have. Marionette maybe, right, Pankaj? But not Prism. I shouldn't have played Prism this weekend.
Aurora and Enigma were both on our 4 recommended heroes last week, and Prism wasn't. So I mean, I don't know, man. We kind of going against your own advice over there.
Yeah.
But your last point, I was actually going to bring up the last point if you didn't actually, familiarity with your own deck. I mean, I've harped about it so many times. Every time someone asks me, "Oh, what do you recommend I play or something?" I'll say, play the one that you have the most fun with and the one you know better. Like, kind of always. Like, if you're in a tiebreaker, not even a tiebreaker situation, even if
it's worth
think
a lot
one
of
deck
points,
is better
right?
positioned, it's worth so much more than you actually think. Especially a deck like Prism. And Prism isn't like, she's aggro, but she isn't as linear and straightforward as, say, Cindra. Cindra is a deck you can pick up a lot quicker than Prism, but Prism is like, there's a lot of uniqueness to like her lines, and especially when you pop Halo is a massive skill check on you as the Prism pilot.
Yeah, and I've played a decent chunk of Prism, but not enough to be doing that. And yeah, it was a good learning. It wasn't one of the decks that we recommended. It wasn't something that I probably should have played. And you know what? Every now and again, you need to make these decisions so that you learn from your mistakes. And if you don't make mistakes, you go a while without making a mistake. Well, why not make a mistake and just remind yourself? And why not do it at a Road to Nationals as opposed to maybe a Nationals or a Pro Tour or something? So just getting it out of my system before we get into the competitive season for the year, I guess.
Yeah, it's the lowest K factor in terms of elo loss. So really, it's the best ground for testing things like this. And who knows, like maybe it could have worked out and you're like, wait, this is awesome.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
All right, moving on to the news. Starting off with some Arsenal Pass news. We have our next gameplay video coming out live tomorrow. Those of you who haven't checked out the first one in the series, it's a series of gameplay videos between Nick Witcher and Hayden Dale here. The first one was awesome. Cindra, Ira, Ninja Mirror. This is a great gameplay series. We have the next one coming out tomorrow. Hayden, do you want to spoil what the matchup is?
Yeah, I do, because I think we're going to talk about these heroes a bit. I think it's pretty relevant in this meta, potentially. It's going to be Enigma versus Arachne Marionette, a deck that, a hero that's close to your heart these days. So, these games they were all, honestly awesome to film, to produce. And I'm excited that we got some nice feedback on the first game in terms of, I think, the thought process and how the game turned out in terms of visuals. So, looking forward to having that second one drop.
I'm really looking forward to that because I think the Marionette Enigma matchup is still a little bit up in the air in terms of who is strictly favored, as particularly because Marionette lists haven't fully coalesced yet as well. So, and they have such a wide range of potential avenues to go down. So that'll be an interesting watch for sure. More Arsenal Pass news. We have our new patron tiers have finally launched with additional content. There's an additional replay analysis that is up there. This is an in-house game between me and one of my testing partners. So we have that. We have, of course, that is a monthly series. And we have one more of the main one that's going to come to the live channel for everyone. It'll be coming out this month as well.
Yeah,
Anything else you want to talk about?
Do you know who you're going to record that with yet, or what? Are you going to wait? Because we've got a couple of Battle Hardens and Callings coming up in the next couple of weeks, and it's a longer month March. So I'm assuming maybe wait for one of those events and then hit us with something.
Either Kobe or Sao Paulo.
Yeah, nice.
Depending which one of them has a spicy game to go over, or something new and fresh. So ideally one of those.
Cool. Love it. No, I think that's it on the content front. I mean, maybe a little tease. We've got some cool merch that's coming very soon. I've been sharing it with Pankaj. We shared it with our patrons. We got some stuff in the next few. Honestly, by the time it all gets produced, probably like pre-orders for some stuff might be up in the next couple of weeks, but it'll be probably about a month before we see it.
Fantastic. RTNs have wrapped up this week. Last weekend was our last weekend of RTNs, and we'll discuss the impact of the meta in the main topic and what we could glean from the last weekend of RTNs where Aurora kind of just shot up to the top of the graph and was destroying everyone. So we'll definitely talk about that. I mean, there's a reason this topic is Aurora, the new Viserai. We also had a BNR, Hayden. No CC changes, but we had some changes to... No, I'm not surprised. I was not expecting anything. And most, I was theory crafting maybe they hit something from Aurora. Not entirely sure what they could hit. I know some people are thinking of like hitting like Flicker Wisp or something. I don't think so. I think the combo thing is like, it's probably an avenue you should still have. I think the suggestion which I heard which convinced me the most, I was like, ooh, I could see this one is Aether Iron Weave. Like banning that, I could see that we just like reduce the ceiling of the combo a little bit, but it still exists. But mostly I was expecting no changes. Were you expecting anything?
No, I don't think. I think we've come now to... It feels very... It's usually easy to see what they're going to ban when it comes to these kind of between set bans, I think. So when it comes to a new set coming out, there's this up in the air piece of, have they found something that's actually broken with their game design or with how they want to produce this next set, right? That's going to limit their design space, right? So obviously banning the books was like something that probably not really anyone saw coming, right? They've, I think Zephyr wasn't preemptively banned, but it was banned pretty quickly, right? On an off-cycle ban. So there's definitely things where sets come out and it's like, something out of the blue could happen here or things unexpected. But when it comes to these kind of now times and the lead-ups to PTs, unless something is very... Like if I'll take High Octane, for instance, after Worlds, right? Like I think that was... I mean, not only did Brian say that, but it was well signposted in the lead up. People thought that card was the one that needed to go, etc. So it wasn't a surprise when it went. If something went this time, whether it be something out of Aurora, whether it have been something, I mean, honestly, I can't see it being anything else other than Aurora. If they were like, Traverse is banned or something, I'd be like, yeah, that was very unexpected.
I would share, but also, the other thing is it's also a little early to tell.
Yeah.
Is the other aspect of this. Viserai just LL'd. We've had 1 weekend of RTNs. Yes, Aurora did well, but I do like the idea of letting players figure out answers for a little bit. Especially when, as you were saying, there's nothing explicitly egregious. There's no Art of War type stuff. There's no Berserk type stuff that could potentially break something. There's no Needle Ira with the retrieve stuff happening either. Those were all kind of in the egregious range. And so far there isn't. There's one... You could argue that the Aurora combo is maybe like pushing up against the ceiling a little bit. But again, it's not to the point where like this is obviously egregious. And I think it's the sort of thing where people might be able to find answers for. So I think it's cool that we get the opportunity to find those. So, other things in the BNR, we had some changes to Blitz. Traverse the Universe is banned. Wouldn't mind seeing that in CC too. Zephyr Needle is banned. And Crown of Seeds is unbanned, which is very, very interesting. In Living Legend, we had Electromagnetic Somersault is restricted. And then finally in Commoner, we had Rosetta Thorn, Waning Moon, Zephyr Needle are banned, and Ball Lightning is unbanned. Anything you want to talk about for these changes, Hayden?
Living Legend Skirmish is coming up, so I think worth maybe just a quick mention there. I think Starvo is the best deck in the format, so probably makes sense that Somersault is restricted. That card is, like, honestly, the turns where they do Somersault, like, back to back to back, or, like, like they draw 2 of them in quick succession, it gives you such a massive boost of, like, hey, I reveal this Somersault and this ice card, at the start of the turn, right? And then you're like, yep, Somersault this back, set up another Oaken Old, like whatever it is. It's just like, oh my friggin' god.
Somersault was the card that got around the other restrictions that Starvo has, right?
Yeah.
They restricted so many of his powerful attacks, and then they gave him Somersault, so then it kind of just undid that restriction, and has a nice defensive element to it as well, if you really need it for that. So it totally makes sense that that one got restricted. I'm not surprised to see that. I still think he's probably still the best deck in the format, but we'll see.
Me too. But no, nothing else. I don't care about the rest, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with the other formats myself either.
All right, that's it. Let's get into the Commander Cookout. If you want to get your questions in for the Commander Cookout, please do so. You can email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. You can drop them in the YouTube comments below. Let us know that they are a Commander Cookout question. You can also pass us a note. I believe someone gave Pankaj a question on the weekend, which we will definitely get to at some point. And or if you're an Arsenal Pass patron, then you can do what Kobe has done here. You can drop it in our Discord, and we'll get to your question. So, the question this week: there seems to be a lot less limited level events at Tier 1 and Tier 2 levels of play. For example, the next skirmish season, Season 11 only has Blitz and Allow as selectable formats, compared to Skirmish Season 10, which had Blitz, Allow, and Rosetta Sealed as the formats of choice. As an anecdote, there have been a lot less limited RTNs and ProQuest showing up locally compared to what we got last year. My question is limited not popular at Tier 1, 2 organized play levels? If so, why is that? If not, what do you think the current state of limited at the casual level is?
I'm mostly of anecdotal evidence myself as well.
Here we go.
But
the limited
what I can
haters coming
say,
in.
well, I mean, you tell me if you've experienced something different at your limited RTNs and ProQuest, but our limited RTNs get way less attendance. Like I mentioned a few times that out here we get our CC RTNs go up to like 5 to 6 Swiss rounds. I've never been to an RTN here that's fewer than 5 rounds when it's CC. But from what I hear about the draft ones, they do one draft and it's a 3 rounds and then they cut to top 8 because of how much smaller the attendance is for the limited RTNs and ProQuest. So my anecdotal evidence says, yeah, limited at the Tier 1 and 2 organized play is also a lot less popular. How's it for you? Do you experience something different?
No, it's the same. It's maybe not quite that drastic, but it's definitely, for instance, there was 2 RTNs in the weekend. I think the first one had maybe 32, 33 players. The one before was CC as well. The weekend before, I think it was like 40 odd players, 41 players. I think the limited on the Sunday was like 17 players. It's close to half. So yeah, it's similar. I think what this does is makes me ask the question. So it seems like LSS are responding to the turnout, right? Probably rightly so, and deciding what these formats are. I guess my question, though, is, like, what is the root cause of this? Like, is it the fact that these limited formats suck? They're not popular? Like, or people just don't play it enough? Or is it kind of like it's self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of these formats are not showing up enough, they're not showing up in skirmish, they're not being offered incentive to run them from a armory standpoint, so people just aren't playing them and therefore don't want to play them when they have to pay money to at a Road to Nationals or try and qualify when they could go to, let's say, a Classic Constructed that's in a close by city or something and play the Classic Constructed one where they have more experience. Is this more of a self-fulfilling thing, or is it truly just that, like, no, actually people just don't enjoy the limited format in Flesh and Blood? And because there was a time where this wasn't quite the case. I think Limited has always been less popular than Classic Constructed, but it has declined. And I would say the quality of set has gone the opposite way for the most part. So that's quite surprising to me, I think. So that's what makes me think, is this actually more of an alignment of the way it's being pushed, the way it's being utilized, and that being, ultimately letting down the opportunity for this to be played at higher levels as well and more consistently.
I wonder how much of it is people's perceptions of Limited being skewed by their experience with Sealed. I think a lot of times people's first experience of the new set is at their pre-release, which is Sealed. And while I agree with you that the limited experience of Flesh and Blood has gotten better, I think we are speaking mostly on draft in that the past few sets, like the draft experience has gotten better and better. The Sealed experience, I think, continues to be a little bit not the greatest. Yeah. And so if people experience the set for the first time at the pre-release and they're playing Sealed, that could maybe skew the perception of Limited in general, and then they see a draft RTN pop up and they're like, I am just not really going to enjoy that. They are not really going to, they just don't vibe with it, and then they don't really show up. I wonder whether that's part of it. That's just me completely spitballing.
No.
But I could see that being a factor.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think it's the same piece for the skirmishes, right? No, I guess one thing that makes me feel aligned with that is I go back to maybe the the prime time for Flesh and Blood draft, right? Or Limited, sorry. The time where I've probably seen the most people playing it, the most people engaged with it, weirdly enough, was Uprising, where, funnily enough, the skirmish season for that season was draft. And people used that skirmish season to help them prepare for Road to National drafts, for instance, or to prepare for Nationals drafts in the upcoming. So I honestly think that, yeah, people are getting turned off from Limited by Sealed. Draft is a very, very different format, but it seems there's like the stigma that like, oh, draft is for the Pro Tour, draft is for Nationals, it's not for anything else. And I do think that limiting skirmishes away from that only helps push that narrative, to be honest. And I do think it's a bit of column A, a bit of column B, but I do think we are heading into this kind of like downward spiral of the fact that like if we don't give incentive for stores to run, drafts, whether it be because, oh, we've got a skirmish in 2 weeks, so the next 2 weeks of Armory is going to be draft to help people prepare, or whatever it might be, or, we're going to run a Road to Nationals draft, and it's going to be, instead of just 1 in 6 or 1 in 7, like I think there was like 9 Road to Nationals within probably like driving distance from me, and I think 2, I think there was 2, definitely 1, I think there might have been a second one that was draft. It's just like, yeah, 2 out of 9 is like, that's not helping that cause, right? And it might be the ultimate decision for helping those stores support getting players in the door and things like that, but I think there's got to be a strategy to try and turn it around at some point. I do think draft is a good format. I do think they've done work on it. I do think it has gotten better and better. So it just feels a bit of a shame to me.
I want to be a bit careful of finding trends where they might not be.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because the other thing that sticks out to me about this season in particular is that the format that we'd be drafting now for RTNs and stuff, like this came to me as you were talking about Uprising. The format we'd be drafting now is not the format that we'd be drafting at Nationals.
True.
So I wonder whether that's part of it as well from LSS's side as well, where they're like, we don't want to have a skirmish season of Hunter draft because interest in that is just going to be lower, because the next time people are playing draft at a high level setting is high seas.
Yeah.
And so I wonder whether that whole just the calendar timeline aspect of it is also affecting how much they want to provide like competitive draft experiences leading up to Nationals.
That's fair.
Just
that's really fair.
Again, and a spitballing thing.
That's really fair. All right, look, I think, I'm sure they've got, LSS have a very clear picture of what they want to do with draft in the future. And like I say, I'm really happy that I feel like for the most part, the draft experience has gotten better. And, maybe it's just a case of they're going to work through that. Maybe it's around timing. Maybe it's things like that. Next skirmish season will feature draft again. It could just be like, this is not the peak draft experience. Or this is not the peak limited experience. So, you know what? We're going to focus this more on constructed. And then next season with high seas, maybe that's where you see more limited, for example. So, yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think just going back to, I guess we've kind of answered the question, right? Like, is limited not popular at tier 1, 2 organized play levels? I think we think yes, to an extent, like it just isn't popular. And then what is the current state of limited at casual? Well, I think unfortunately it's probably been viewed through a lens of pre-releases, which is sealed, right? And I do think that is the challenge. So I guess my answer to all that is I'd love to see limited more in the form of draft. I would love to see draft, I'd love to be able to show up to my local armory and be like, yeah, there's a draft on this week. Like, what I mean? And people are excited about it. That's what I want to see. That's the end goal I'd like to get to.
It's definitely been a while since I've been to a draft armory for sure. I haven't really been keeping track of what is like which armies or which format all the time, but yeah. Cool.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, thank you for the question. If you want to get your questions in, as I say, please do so. We always love getting great questions on the pod, reading them out. With that said, Pankaj, I think it's probably time to go to the main topic, don't you?
Let's do it.
So, main topic this week. Are we living now in a period of pure aggro domination? Is this a case of Aurora replacing Viserai? Where does the lay of the land sit after this last week of Road to Nationals, and as we head towards Pro Tour London, calling Kobe coming up, calling Sao Paulo coming up? CC is an interesting spot. If we just take a quick look at Classic Constructed snapshot from week 4 Road to Nationals, Aurora put up 18 wins this past week in Road to Nationals. The next closest competitor were Zen and Cindra, 8 apiece, so 2 ninjas following up the other ninja in the form of Aurora. To be fair, more and more Aurora looks like a rune blade as opposed to a ninja, I think, a little bit, as we see things like the armory deck. There's a combo.
The armory deck, yes. The armory deck, yes. Yeah.
Arcane damage combo.
Yeah.
New at 7 wins, Prism at 6. So maybe I didn't make that. Prism did win some armory, some Road to National, this past weekend. So, Vincent at 6 as well. And then a bunch at 5, 4, 3, etc. So that is kind of where things sit as we enter this kind of discussion. So anything you want to comment on the wins this week? Otherwise, I might pose the question that you kind of posed, which is, has Aurora replaced Viserai?
I think I want to start there. The premise that I want to put forward is that Aurora is the new Viserai in the sense that she does a very, very similar thing, where she's at the baseline an aggro deck, but not an aggro deck you can be fully defensive into, because if you do, she will blow you up. Just like how they do it in slightly different ways. Viserai would have set up like 20 rune chants and then sent them at you, and Aurora is just going to combo you. She just has a combo package that she can put into. So in that sense, she's very similar to Viserai in that she has a good aggro plan. She's a good plan A and a good plan B too, which punishes decks that are trying to target her because you are being torn into different directions. Also, the standard, something that she has that Viserai didn't, was just the breakpoints. A deck that just keeps sending 4s is so much harder to deal with than something like Cindra, which she sends a whole bunch of 3s, even though Cindra might send one more 3 on average on a turn. Aurora's cards are 4, which is a lot more annoying.
With some on-hits. Breakpoints are real.
Yeah, and when you look at the wins, isn't it? It feels almost like if you looked at the previous weeks and you just combined Viserai and Aurora in those pie charts, and you look at this week, it seems like it's very, very similar. Yeah, like Aurora and Viserai were the top 2 for a lot of the previous weeks as well, and now Aurora just has a bigger chunk of the top. So, kind of feels like she is just the new Viserai.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I guess my question is Aurora the new Viserai for week 4 of Road to Nationals because of the shakeout of the format, or is Aurora the new Viserai for the foreseeable future of this format? I guess is my question. Like, was it just a case of meta hasn't quite adjusted, people put down Viserai, a lot of people just went to pick up Aurora this week, and the now you need breathing room in the format to react? Or is it, is it actually just that, no, Aurora has just literally replaced Viserai and almost absorbed it and is now going to be an even bigger share of the meta?
I think her game plans are very similar-esque to what Viserai did, which is what I was saying just now, where she just has the 2 disparate game plans. I will say, though, I think she does both slightly worse than Viserai, which perhaps gives the meta just more room to adjust, in the sense that her combo package is just a little more interactable than Viserai's was, because her combo package is a little bit more all-in. If you catch her on the turn when she's holding her combo pieces, she can't set them up in the way that Viserai did. Viserai was still okay blocking 2-3 cards and then read the runes kind of thing, or play a Malefic. He was okay, the setup for his combo was a little bit more spread out potentially, whereas hers is she draws the hand, and if you mess with her on that hand, the combo is a little bit more fragile in that sense. And then her aggro side is also a little bit less good because she just seems to be a little bit more bricky, and that sometimes her cards also don't block. At least before this pre-armory deck that we're talking about. So in that sense, I think she's doing the same things as Viserai, but because she's doing both plans slightly worse, I could see what you were talking about, where the meta maybe has that space to adapt now because she isn't as strong as Viserai was at doing those things.
I'll play devil's advocate a little bit. I think she's maybe not quite as good a pure aggro deck, maybe not quite as good in terms of the interactable nature of that big damage turn from a combo standpoint. What I will say, though, is that I think Aurora is harder to fatigue. I think you have more you have more damage in your deck than Viserai does. So I think you are just harder to purely fatigue down. Viserai can maybe set up 2 big turns, and it can sometimes struggle to honestly set up a 3rd big turn, especially if a well-timed sort of CNC comes in and buys maybe one of the last pieces of your combo or something. Whereas I do think Aurora naturally can set up 3 more medium-sized turns, can set up 2 bigger turns, and also just has damage to throw afterwards to potentially leak through as well, or can just be more purely aggressive to potentially get through life gain. So I do think it's a little bit harder to, like, I think if I looked at Enigma, much easier to fatigue Viserai than it was to fatigue Aurora, for instance. On the aggro side, I agree. Like, just if you're looking at pure damage output and consistency of damage output, I think Viserai just did it better. One thing I'll say about Aurora, though, and you've said this to me before multiple times, Aurora is quite hard to disrupt. Like, the disruption pieces don't necessarily target Aurora that well, whether it be, the Erase Faces, the Warmongers of the world, the CNCs. They don't necessarily target Aurora or weakest link, right? Don't target Aurora in the same way as they do other aggressive slanting decks. So, yeah, I agree. But also, if I flip to the other side, I think there's some things that maybe Aurora does differently to Viserai.
The fatigue part makes a lot of sense because unlike Viserai, majority of Aurora's damage is actually physical, which is harder to fatigue. Viserai, sending a bunch of rune chants at you, you're like an Enigma or a Mystic hero. You're just pitching your blues that go back in your deck. Aurora sending 4/4/4 and like 1 arcane pings. So most of the damage is still physical. You're losing cards in deck to block that. So I definitely agree with you on the fatigue front. Although I do wonder how relevant that is, because I think...
Well, that's the question.
It's a similar thing, where it's like, against Viserai, it was very difficult to go into Viserai with the game plan, I'm going to fatigue him. Like, that being the primary game plan. It was more of a, at least from the experience I had with it, was like on the new side, it was more of a, I'm going to threaten the possibility of it, but that couldn't have been my game plan.
I think it
couldn't be
depended
my
on the
only
deck.
game plan sitting down.
Yeah,
it couldn't be my only game plan was sitting down because of X reasons. And I feel like CYB had a similar thing where because of Reaping Blade, you couldn't just sit down and be like, this is my primary game plan. Enigma could set up Ward, I guess. So, like,
Enigma honestly, like,
maybe Enigma could.
The Enigma strategy, like, I played it so much in the lead up to Worlds and Post. Like, it actually became, even against like the best Viserai players who knew exactly what you're doing, it still felt pretty favored. Like, all you would literally do is you just go pass the turn. And then eventually Viserai goes, well, I can no longer build up rune chance, so I have to, because I finally bricked on an all attack action hand. Like, I have to filter my hand somehow. I now have too many rune chance to dump it into Grasp the Arknight, and eventually they just have to attack you, and you go, okay, block out what I can, take down life, gain more life, set up back more ward. Like, Enigma was, I think, the anomaly to that, but yeah, I mostly agree. If you're just a purely CYB deck, then they often didn't care. And if you weren't a deck that could fatigue by threat, right, almost like proactive fatigue, right, which is something I love to talk about. I love a good bit of proactive fatigue. Then I think you're in trouble. I think Enigma was the outlier on that one, to be fair.
Yeah. And then Aurora's a similar thing where it's like, sure, she's harder to fatigue than Viserai, but like, how much does that matter? Like, who can actually go into Aurora being like, oh, okay, my plan is like fatigue you. So if that game plan is turned off already because she has a combo package. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really matter if it's like harder to execute it because that isn't a viable game plan to begin with. Was like my take.
Yeah, at the highest levels. I think when you get at some of maybe like the Road to Nationals level, honestly, I think being harder to fatigue is a real thing because I think just execution of game plan is just not at the same level, right? Like, I use an example, right? If you say you have total 200 damage in your deck, and if you don't sequence all your damage correctly and you lose damage here or there, then you won't be able to get through the fatigue. Whereas if you have 250 damage, you've got more leeway, right, to not play the plan perfectly, and it being harder fatigue is relevant. But yeah, I mostly agree at the higher levels.
Actually, funnily enough, you spoke about Enigma being a little bit of an outlier for the Viserai fatigue thing. I think New is actually a bit of an outlier for the Aurora fatigue thing, where CYB New, or a New with even just some healing like Sigil of Solace and built more towards fatigue, could actually threaten fatigue on Aurora.
Yeah, interesting.
But that's also partly because it's very difficult for Aurora to give up the big armor pieces to side into full combo into New, because New is sending on hits.
Yeah.
So it's like Aurora's in a bit of a tough spot where they can't side full combo in terms of equipment, which just means that it's easier for the New to fatigue. But if they side full combo, the combo can get disrupted. So it's again the outlier thing like we were talking about, where New potentially can fatigue Aurora. I'm just not sure whether that sort of strategy in general is viable across the rest of the field.
Yeah, makes sense. I have a question. So we talk about an aggro-dominated meta. Is this really it? I mean, if you look at the top 5 heroes this past week, Aurora, Cindra were, 2 of the top 3 decks. Prism, I mean, realistically in this format is an aggro deck, but it's like you said, it's a bit of a more unique aggro deck. Zen it's aggressive in nature, but it's not necessarily an aggro deck. Like, it tries to be a bit more mid-rangey. It's on the wax on plan, right? It's on more defense reaction, more value-based plan, I would say. But it's still a damage dealing combat based deck. New maybe the outlier in that top 5 to an extent. I guess my question is this an aggro meta, or actually is this a meta that's now trying to just respond to Aurora, and the default aggro deck, because it's just the best, is Aurora, or can these other aggro decks potentially play a part?
Sorry, so the question is this an aggro met?
Well, we've gone through metas before, right? Where it's just been correct to play one aggro deck. The aggro deck is the correct one to play because the others are just not as fast. Are we in that situation with Aurora?
Right, so you're asking whether there's ever a reason to play the other aggro decks over Aurora. And I think the main thing when I look at Cindra and Prism in particular is that they are better into Aurora. is the thing.
Sure.
So I think in the Aurora-Cindra matchup, Cindra is slightly favored. In the Prism-Aurora matchup, Prism is favored. Mm-hmm. But they lose points into the other decks where Aurora has a Flicker-Wisp sideboard to go ahead and come out on top.
So potentially, yes,
is how it answered that question.
Yeah, so there potentially is a reason.
Yes, there's a reason to play these other flavors of aggro decks, but they are still aggro decks. And in that sense, yes, we are in an aggro format, an aggro meta, I would say.
Okay, that makes sense. What's your thoughts on Zen then? Where does Zen sit in all of this?
Zen is kind of tilting, honestly. It's like, he's a mid-range deck. What I hate about Zen is that when I play against Zen, it's like the games go so wildly differently just based on whether they saw Chi in their first 3 or 4 hands. Sometimes they find their Chi, and I'm like, cool, I'm going to block out fully because this is one of your strong turns. And then they draw 2D reacts, and
you punish them.
They have a attack with Kakara, and then 0 for 1 or whatever. Sometimes, though, I'm going to block out a full Chi turn, and then they just draw into another level's double Transcend, and they draw again into another Transcend, and I'm like, this is very frustrating. It just feels like the variance in that deck has just gone up, and the output is just so variable now. It's just, I can't, I know I wouldn't enjoy playing that deck, basically. I'm playing against it, too. Sometimes I'm like, okay, this is my pivot turn, and then they have wax on the exact turn that I want to pivot. Yep. And then the turns where I'm blocking out, they have the full transcend thing. I'm like, this is very frustrating. Zen is I think he's slightly favored into Aurora. I think so. He feels like a little bit in the middle, where he's not quite Aurora's level of has that almost inevitable combo against a deck that's trying to be defensive, but he is still good against the defensive decks. But he also doesn't have the aggression of the Cindra and the Prism, where it's you beat Aurora every time kind of thing. Not every time, but I'm exaggerating that. But you get what I'm saying. He feels a little bit in the middle is my current take, with some variance injected.
Yeah. I would love to talk a little bit about what the rest of this meta looks like if we feel that it is, it feels like it's aggro leaning. We've just talked about 3 aggro decks that are very playable, plus Zen. For whatever frustration you have, seems like it has a spot because of the fact that it might be good into that, and also has historically been pretty good into things like Enigma as well. Might have a better game into Prism, for instance, as well. I guess what I would love to discuss first, though, is where does Aurora go next? Because we're about to have the Armory deck drop. Do we think this pushes that agenda towards Aurora even more? Maybe stays status quo?
So historically, whenever a deck has just more cards, they always improve, right? Because you can never get worse. You always get better, or you stay neutral. So my instinct is to say it's gonna get better, but I do have an asterisk on this where I could totally see a world where nothing changes in terms of Aurora's strength, because the new cards make her more susceptible to Warmongers. If they start going into playing Return to Stars and Skyward Serenade, and then playing Phase Purgatory and cutting some instants and instant payoffs, now suddenly Warmongers is a hate piece that's very relevant against Aurora, which so far it hasn't. We spoke about how hate against Aurora is very, very difficult because she's so resilient to a lot of these hate pieces. Well, if she brings Return to Stars and Skyward Serenades and goes more non-attack heavy, now suddenly there is a hate card that is relevant, and maybe the added power is not worth it. So there's an asterisk there. I expect the power level to increase, but there's an asterisk because maybe it's not worth it. What are your thoughts?
Well, you well know you're very unlikely to see a Phase Purgatory registered in my deck, but no, I agree. I think what are you getting in return for adding those cards into your deck is the biggest thing, and it's it comes down to consistency for me. If you're getting consistent... So Skyward Serenade, I think, is in a band of its own. I think that card is very good, for instance. So I think there is very good reason to put that in your deck. does that extend to then you also play the blue, you play maybe something like Sizzle, right? Like you add another non-attack action, and then you get to face Purgatory and you change the shape of the deck. Does that, like, is Skyward Serenade pushing you enough to that spot? Because without Skyward, I don't think you do that, right? So I think that's the question. Or can you just play Skyward and Skizik, and that's, that's good because those cards are good, for instance. So that's probably the question I think Aurora has to face.
Well, maybe if it's just Skyward and Skizik, I don't know. I totally imagine game states where you've seen your Skiziks early, and then now your Skywards are just not great cards. Like, they're still fine. You get +1 embodiment, but it's like kind of whatever. It's like you just activated Aurora and you just got +1 for it, kind of thing, Yeah. So, yeah, I could see that potentially not being it, but then, yeah, I think it comes back to the rest of the non-attacks and whether the susceptibility to Warmongers is worth it, because
they haven't been so far.
Sorry?
They haven't been so far. Like Sizzle, things like that. I don't think they've been, worth it so far.
Yes, yeah. So some people argue it's not. I've seen some lists with Sizzle in
me
it,
too.
because it's nice as a starter sometimes. But also, there's never been enough non-attacks in the Aurora deck for Warmongers to be a viable card, a hate card to bring into them. But now there might be, and then you're like, maybe it's not worth it, and you just go back to the current builds of Aurora. I could totally see Return of Stars probably just being an easy auto-include, because that's a blue block 3 that says lightning on it. The Serenades and the Sizzles and the Skiziks are where we're going to need more testing.
Yeah. Just to, I guess, wrap up on Aurora before we start to talk about the outcomes of where Aurora is. It sounds like we're starting to get towards where we think Aurora is in this meta, though. I guess the question is, how far ahead is Aurora right now? Best deck?
I think she's very far. I think she is. Yeah, I think she's best deck in format. She's, like, quite simply, she's just more resilient than Cindra to hate, to like the hate cards and to bad matchups. Like, even into Prism. Like, Aurora is still just, like, in terms of the aggro decks that are soft to Prism, Aurora is still the one that's slightly more resilient than Cindra is because of the Fridge, and also Sigil of Suffering, which is just can be really, really good in the certain spots, right? Prism sometimes doesn't have the spare resource to stop it, so you get the draw, or just slimes an angel, or forces them to pitch a whole card. And on that point, I think the other thing that actually isn't being talked about a lot, isn't being talked about enough, I think, is the fact that on top of Aurora having such a great Fidge, she makes all of her opponents give up one piece of equipment for AB. And that's something that I feel like people aren't talking about that power level aspect of her enough. Like, as Mario, for example, we give up a headpiece. We give up Mask of Deceit to put an AB over there into Aurora, which is such a big reduction in power level for what that Mask piece does for Marinette. And similar for many other heroes, right? Unless, with the exception of like Cindra, because Cindra's just like gonna race and they bring 0 AB. But like Zen even gives up either Shuko or the leg piece. The leg piece gives up an additional Tiger, like to turn on Chase the Tail more easily, or gives up Shuko, which is 2 block plus how much ever times it activates. Like, other decks are giving up a lot just to play the game into Aurora. And I think that's another thing that just puts her quite far ahead.
Yeah, I think if I'm Zen, I'm actually not sure I'm playing AB in that matchup, to be honest. Maybe.
Some people might not.
Yeah, that might be the question, right? Like, is some of these decks actually, should they be playing AB? And some will have to, right? Because just the way they want the game to go. But, yeah.
Cindra doesn't, but Zen, I feel like, it depends how you're building him. If you're building him with the D-Reacts, I think you just need to. Zen also does get some blue do-nothing hands, right? And it's just like, you kind of do want to be able to like block with them if you can. And if they start with an Arc Lightning and you're just holding your blue do-nothing hand, it's a bit embarrassing to not be able to block anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just, yeah.
I agree. I think I'm on the same path. I think Aurora is, has the deck to beat. I think it's quite clearly, it's stamped its claim on the format last week, right? And I do think it's for good reason. I do think it is the best deck, and I think whatever way it goes with the Armory deck, it's going to have an impact. And to the point we might just see multiple iterations of Aurora through the next few weeks until they're solidified a better version, or people reacting to the hate cards that are responded with by like, okay, we go towards the non-attack actions, Warmongers come out, oh, okay, I'm just going back towards the more instant version and cut these again. So it could ebb and flow. It's really interesting.
The Armory deck coming out at this time is so interesting. It reminds me of the KO Armory deck coming out when KO was at his height of the meta, and people are like, wait, why is KO getting an Armory deck right now? He's already the best deck in format, and you're giving him Savage Sash. It feels a little bit similar vibes where Aurora's already the deck to beat, and then it's like, here's a bunch of upgrades.
It's funny. So I guess if we think this is an aggressive format, it's, Aurora's best deck, Cindra is a player, there's a few other aggressive decks at the top. What does the rest of the format look like? Or is there a rest of the format, right? Like, is there truly counters? And in theory, right, if Aurora becomes such a big part of the format, or Aurora plus Cindra becomes such a big part of the format, plus maybe the fringe aggro decks, there has to be some sort of answer and movement towards an answer, right? So what do we think that is?
The first place I think people will look is the Guardians. Historically, you have aggro decks around. Guardian kind of beats him up. He has a Spinal Crush, very difficult for you to deal with. So Jarl and Victor are the two viable Guardians to speak about. We're not going to talk about Betsy or Bravo. Is there even a fifth one? I feel like there might be a fifth one. I'm just completely
pull one out for
anyway,
Patrick on Bravo there.
Victor and Jarl. I'm less high on Jarl for the same reason I wasn't high on Jarl into Viserai, where he's just slow and dirtly, and Aurora's like just gonna park a Flicker Wisp until she sees Arc Lightning and then blow you up. And then you need to have, you IP a Blizzard the entire game? I don't know. I'm less high on Jarl into Aurora. Victor is one where I could see him being... Victor's position is so interesting. I look at this graph and I'm like, wait, Victor is fine into all top 5 of the heroes except Nu. Like Cindra, Aurora, Prism, he's like good into. And then Zen, he's like even to slightly good into, and then Nu's the like auto loss. But it's like, you look at a spread and you're like, oh, maybe Victor's like fine. But also into Aurora, it's like Aurora is still able to play the game into Victor, so maybe he's not good enough. Like he's good but not good enough because he has these other auto losses. Maybe.
I do think Victor's been a little bit under respect, like a little bit disrespected, to be honest. I think he's not been played as much. I do think as well there's still been a lot of new enjoyers out there, so I think people have been a little bit hesitant to play Victor. Enigma has still been running around, I think, but not necessarily putting up results. So I think there's been some other things that have maybe held Victor down, but I do think more than the results suggest, I think Victor is a very viable option right now, especially if you take a step back and look at how you want to play Victor into these matchups and potentially how you might craft and build it to make sure you are really good into these aggro decks and the different iterations of aggro decks, right? Because what's good against Cindra isn't necessarily what's good against Aurora, so you might need some sideboard options for that. And you're probably at this point just being like, well, if I get paired against Enigma, okay, that's fine. I'll just go have lunch. It's fine.
Or Nu. I actually think the Nu matchup is worse for Victor than Enigma.
Yeah. But I mean, it's always been terrible. Nu
yeah.
You can't do anything about, whereas like Enigma you could potentially build a sideboard for, whereas I think you have too much other things to worry about right now.
Absolutely. We already spoke about Zen. Is there anything else you want to add on Zen being a potential counterpick to Aurora? I do think it's slightly Zen favored, that matchup, but I'm not sure if it's favored enough where I would call him a counterpick.
Zen reminds me of that classic mid-range deck that hangs out in the format that has pretty good matchup spreads. Like it's got a lot of 45-55s, but unlike the last time I think we saw that being really prevalent, which I'd say was KO, to be honest, in the heavy hitter season, Zen is not all proactive, whereas KO had a lot of like 45-55 matchups, but it was 95% proactive. So to your point about those like feels bad hands and the bricking and stuff like that, KO was more consistent at doing that 45-55 thing. So it's less exciting to me than that prospect of a mid-range deck has been in previous formats.
And you played Prism this past weekend. What are your thoughts on Prism as a counterpick?
Yeah, it's my one.
Or this meta in general, since it is aggro slanted.
Yeah, it's my one win. It's pretty good. I do think it's very good into Aurora. I do think it's very good into Cindra as well. I think you can struggle into Zen, Ira, things like that, where they have more capability of playing defensive cards, have a fridge, have better blocking cards, because you start at 32 life. It's simple as that, really. So, yeah, I think Prism... I just fundamentally am not sure that Prism is strong enough, honestly. I think you have to basically close to give up a bunch of other matchups or be really bad into them for probably a couple of really good matchups, but not as amazing as you might think. Like, they might be more like 60%ers as opposed to like 70%ers based on what you might think. So, yeah, I'm fine, but I'm not super excited about Prism.
Prism is interesting in the context of the other aggro decks, because unlike the other aggro decks, she's actually the one who can firmly say she's favored into the Assassins, which I think is an interesting aspect that she gets that the other aggro decks doesn't. But it comes at the cost of being the only aggro deck out of the Aurora, Zen, Cindra pile that doesn't get to say they're favored into Enigma, because they're actually is unfavored into Enigma. So it's a very, very... it's just a very unique matchup spread.
I think you can build a sideboard to have a good game into Enigma, honestly. Like, at least get yourself to be around like 50-50. Like, I do think there is a plan that works. But in saying that, like, still the problem is you have 32 life. Like, even these matchups where you're like, oh yeah, I'm good into this. Like, you have a couple of bad hands, or you like your opponent just luckily like lucks into like exactly one D-react in their arsenal multiple times in a row, or like they hit like they're like, oh, I play 3 poppers. Here's 2 of them 2 turns in a row. Like, you will just lose those games. Like, and there's nothing you can do about it because you don't have enough life to find a pivot or to build back a pivot turn. You just have to do it earlier, and a lot of the time you have 1 to even sometimes 2 less turns than you would like as the deck. So
I want to talk a little bit about potential dark horses when it comes to counter picks, like these picks that we don't really see in the graph of RTN wins, but I feel like maybe potentially need to be explored a little bit more. And I want to start with, okay, the class is warrior, but not all of them. Like, honestly,
Sure.
I think most of them are just not viable. One in particular, which is Dawnblade Dory. Specifically that one, because we think aggro meta, we think decks are not that great at blocking. Is Dawnblade Dory a potential dark horse deck that gets to race these aggro decks?
I mean, I think so. I think we saw it in LA as an answer to. I know, obviously, we saw Hatchet's Dory, right? But we also saw. I know Dagon White played it. I know Nick Butcher played it too. I think to 9th or 10th, whatever he was, like at top 16 at LA in what people would probably describe as a proactive, semi-aggressive meta, but they were targeting KO, which was an aggro deck. So yeah, I mean, I can see it. I think Dawnblade Dory is good against aggro decks. It always has been. That's exactly the traditional position it's had. So yeah.
I'm so curious to see whether someone can come up with a build sort of like the reverse of PTLA. So PTLA, they were playing hatchets because it's just better numbers than KO. And then they had Dawnblade on the side for Dromai. And I wonder whether you could do some sort of opposite thing. Obviously, I don't think it can be hatchets and Dawnblade again because like the axes payoff cards and the sword payoff cards are very different. But maybe a dual wielding sword build with Dawnblade in the main board, where you can switch into the dual wielding for the assassins. Because Dawnblade into new, I think, like normally we say warriors good into new, but we are specifically talking about dual handing warriors, not Dawnblade. Dawnblade into new actually isn't great for the warrior side in my experience, simply because of the card Siren's Call and the fact that new gets the information of your entire hand like half the game, and then you lose so much of your strength because you lose the hidden information aspect of it. But when you play dual wielding into assassins, that makes them really sad because all your cards are so modal and so what's the word? Repeat. What's the word I'm looking for? Like they repeat. Like they're the same card. There's just like
there's redundancy, and there's just pure redundancy.
Redundancy,
right? Yeah,
that one. So I do wonder whether that sort of build of Dory can maybe have a place where it's reverse of PTLA. You're playing Dawnblade most of the time because you're planning to play against aggro decks, and then you have the dual wielding on the side for the assassins. So I could see that being a potential dark horse.
100%. No, I can see it. Okay. Any other dark horses you want to talk about? These next two are definitely yours. Although I will speak about the last one. I'll speak about the last one.
Yes. The next one I'll talk about is Vincent. I think Vincent's actually quite positive into Aurora and Cindra. And I think the Enigma Vincent matchup has more space to be explored. I used to think it was Enigma favored. I used to be like, oh, they'll just do a Traverse Maragai turn and blow you up. And then I saw a very, very skilled Vincent play against an Enigma, and I was like, wait, this could be closer than I thought it was. Because they'll just not attack, don't give you a chance to block or traverse until they triple rune gate you in one turn. And this turn in particular that I saw was really, really cool because the person also went double cull. They made an eloquence token and then went play double cull and just didn't let the Enigma block at all. And then suddenly Enigma's down to 10 and can't block at all. So I think Vincent has game into those other decks and also is actually favored into the aggro matchups from what I've seen so far. So I'm going to put her up as a dark horse. Do you have thoughts on that?
I have a similar concern with Vincent as I do about Levia, is that your deck just doesn't function sometimes and doesn't let you play the game. So, I actually have respect for Vincent. I think that hero is it is a true dark horse. I think there's a lot of complications to how to play that hero and how to line up your turns, and then sometimes you plan it all out and you draw the wrong cards. or your opponent has the disruption piece at just the right time. But no, I do think Vincent is probably better than people have given it credit for. I think it's probably starting to get respected close to enough, maybe not quite enough, but I do agree Vincent is decent.
I will point out, in the last weekend's RTN wins, Vincent had the same number of wins as Prism.
Yep.
And I somehow doubt she had the same play rate, so maybe there's just something that's being missed here by a lot of people. Like, I do think Vincent's play rate is probably on the lower end and still managed to put up as much results as she did. So I do think there's like something there.
You had donkeys like me going 1-2 with Prism, right? So I think it's pretty... I would put Vincent probably if I was to do something that we never do on Arsenal Pass and I do a tier list, I would probably put Vincent above Prism for sure. Like, I think that is probably fair, because I also have some concerns with Prism. The fact it starts on 32 life sucks right now, so I don't know.
Next Dark Horse pick I want to talk about, Hayden, is a hero that's just conspicuously missing from this graph.
It's not conspicuous. It's not conspicuous.
Okay. All right, fine. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And that's Azalea.
Yeah.
Aggro dominator meta. We went into Dawnblade Dory before we start talking about the potential, what's potentially been the most classic counter to aggro in history, which is Azalea. Where has Azalea been? Why isn't she converting? Are people just not playing her, or like what's going on with Azalea? It sounds like you have thoughts.
When was Azalea good? What format?
The last one I'm thinking was, well, calling Phuket when Brody took it down on Azalea. Azalea looked good that format. I don't super remember. Like, I remember Prism was a thing.
Yeah.
What else? It was
post.
It was pre MST. Yeah, post Dromai, pre MST.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, KO was the best deck in the format, I think.
Well, Azalea was decent to KO, right?
Yeah.
A big part being you're like not vulnerable to flashback.
Yeah, I'm trying to put my finger on like what was driving Azalea to be good when it has been good. I think there's this kind of, I think it's a bit of a misconception that Azalea is like really favored into aggressive decks. I actually just don't think that's true, because I think Azalea has good damage and it has these on hits. But if you didn't block Azalea and you don't draw Red in the Ledger in any of your hands, a lot of aggro decks will outrace you. So I'm not so certain that Azalea is. I think the problem is that a lot of the time your games come down to Red in the Ledger. Like that is the problem with Azalea when you're trying to be aggro decks. So I don't think you can ever be massively favored into aggressive decks, I think, is my view. That's been my experience testing it anyway. Is like I've been like, Azalea should be good here. I test it, I play it, and then I ultimately put it aside because the damage output or the games where you don't see a Red in the Ledger against aggressive decks is just so disgusting. And people have learned how to play around like what used to blow people out was like getting them like codex turns, really efficient codex turns. And people are just much better at understanding how to navigate codex than they used to be, and you don't get the same blowouts that you used to. So between Red and Ledger and codex, the rest of your deck it's fine. It's just fine.
Mm-hmm. The lack of flexibility in the Azalea side is, I think, what hurts a lot. Like when the Azalea starts blocking, it's
screwed.
Like so bad. And often they get hands where they're forced to block with certain cards, like
arrows.
multiple arrow hands, and it's just like, okay, I have to block, and then now the aggro deck's like coming up ahead. Actually, I'm gonna pivot a little bit away from our Dark Horse conversation here to talk about a deck we actually didn't dive deep into, because this conversation about Azalea reminded me of this. Actually, Cindra. We kind of just like skipped over Cindra. We spoke about like Zen and Prism.
Yeah.
But Cindra, as one of our top 5 aggro decks, where do you think she sits in this meta? Is there a reason to play her over Aurora?
I'm not sure, honestly. Like, I'm really down on Cindra. I think my experience has been the more and more I play against Cindra, the more and more terrible that deck looks. Like, the more you understand how to block it and its power turns, like, if you block it well every turn, it's so hard for them to set up a good damage turn. Like, if they can't get Mask off, like that 6th card. So the difference between, they have really good 5-card hands, don't get me wrong. They have a couple of really good 5-card hands, but they have a ton of fantastic 6-card hands. So as soon as you close down that opportunity to the 6th card, I think their turns, their total damage output over the course of the game looks very different, I would say. So that's just been my experience with Cindra. I think if you've got specific matchups where Cindra is better than Aurora, yeah, there's probably a reason to play Cindra. But if it's down to just purely what the decks do. I think Aurora is just a better aggro deck. Granted, I know Aurora can obviously have bricks and stuff as well.
I'm a little bit higher on Cindra than you are, I think. I think one other thing that's underrated is not just the mask part, it's just how, like, it's very difficult to block her. Like, you talk about how, you just stop the mask and then, like, you're chilling, but it's really hard to stop the mask, especially if you're a deck like Aurora, and sometimes, and sometimes you draw, like, 2 instants, or, like, even 1 instant, and then a 2 block. You draw 1 instant and 1 2 block, and then the thing's coming, like, on. Like, she, like, eats up your armor, and then now you can't block properly, because if you're just left with just the instant, it doesn't make any sense, because you need to pair it with that attack that you can't block. So now you can't block with that either, and then the things come, and then you're forced to, like, give up your armor, and then every now and then you get, there's a breaking point that could be at the end of it as well. She does have a bit of disruption, which she doesn't need to pitch for. So I
didn't say there's no reason to play Cindra. I just saying I don't think that I'm not high on that hero. Like, I think if you've got a good matchup into Aurora, because of the fact that you're just you're the one that asked the question better than Aurora does, so they have to respond to you, then that's a reason to play it, right? But I think a lot of your other matchups are gonna suffer. Like, I think if you look towards, like, the mid-range decks and even the more, like, quote-unquote control decks, these defensive decks, Aurora is just by far and away significantly better into those matchups. And I think Aurora is potentially slightly worse into the aggro matchups. So just all things considered, I'm just like, I think it needs to be very specific for you to play Cindra, I think.
Agreed. If this somehow devolves to a 1-deck format where, like, you should just be playing Aurora, then that's where I'd be like, okay, so there's a very clear reason to play Cindra. Aside from that, I feel like Cindra's a bit similar in the Prism thing to me, where you play it because it's better into Aurora, like, than Aurora is into Aurora, but you lose points somewhere else. Like, Prism loses points into, like, the Enigma and the Victors, and Cindra loses points in, like, the Victors and potentially like the Earth heroes. I have heard some people say they're, like, fine as Earth hero into Cindra.
Yeah.
So, okay. Coming back to Dark Horses then. There is one hero in particular. I was looking at the Talsha stats for decks that are positive into Aurora, and this one stuck out to me, and I was like, I need to ask Hayden about this one, because he's gonna have thoughts. So if you look at Talsha stats, and yep, it is Talsha stats, but apparently Dash Inventor Extraordinaire is favored into Aurora. Do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I think I thought that'd be pretty obvious. Like, I think people have this weird thing where they're like, oh, Dash is, like, not good into aggro for some reason. But I'm like, Dash is the best, like, has the best damage output and has the ability to block. So I've never understood this. Like, yes, you've lost High Octane, right? Which has taken a massive knock to that, because you don't have the High Octane pop-off turns for your total damage. But if you start with Pounder and you just, all your cards are 0 for 4 or 1 for 5 go again card, like, the value you get, plus you have tech, like, you have on demand find or spring tunic every single turn, you have maximum velocity, like, your damage is just ridiculous. So especially if you start with sparking out another item or something, or you get a good spark turn in the game, to second turn you spark out Teklo Core and you get the 3 turns of playing Pitchless, for instance. Like, your damage is ridiculous. The problem is that your deck is the resource, and as soon as people are not playing a balls out aggro deck, right, they're gonna destroy you. They're gonna fatigue you immediately, because all they have to do is make sure they get through your good 5 turns. But Aurora and Cindra can't do that. So I'm not surprised that Dash has great stats against Aurora, probably Cindra as well. But after that, I don't really know where you go. And you can't play a hybrid package to be able to beat Enigma or Victor, or honestly even like Verdance or any of these things. It just doesn't work. So if a deck can fatigue you, then you're not gonna. I don't think there's a good way to make your matchup better into that. So I think Dash has to be. To be honest, if you expected everyone to show up on Aurora and Cindra, yes, I would play Dash. I'd play Dash Inventor Extraordinaire in a heartbeat.
I would put Prism there as well, actually. Isn't Dash also good into Prism, just on the back of being a mechanologist, in the sense that you have these natural poppers? Like, you just have 3 max Vs in your deck, and then you have the 3 red throttles, which you want to play anyway.
Yeah.
And then that just, like, helps. And if you really want to go dig deeper into, like, the other mech 2-for-6s or 3-for-6s, if you really want
poppers. I do think,
like, she's also fine into...
Losing High Octane was pretty big for the Prism matchup.
So she's also, like, fine into Prism. As far as, like, these top aggro decks go, suddenly you're like, wait, Dash is actually fine into all of them. Even arguably into Zen, you put a T-bow and stuff, and you blow up the Traverse before they get to block with it, and it's, like, really, really annoying for them. But yeah, the loss of High Octane makes it so any deck that can just block you comfortably is just going to fatigue you.
We'll do so. Yeah. And that's the problem.
Actually, On the aggro thing, I think one card that also should be mentioned is Pulse Wave Harpoon. I mean, with Mech's absence from the meta, people might have forgotten this card, but that card's really good in the aggro mirrors.
It's insane. It's honestly...
also, T-Bone against Cindra is just brutal as well.
Like,
just a couple of T-Bones and then they just lose a piece. Yeah.
When we went to Nationals, it was like, okay, how many Pulse Wave Harpoons and double T-Bone hands do you see in the first 3 turns is like the dictator of whether you win the Zen matchup. And yeah, and also because you still had high octane in these pop-off turns, like that matchup actually felt good, especially when people were unprepared for kind of, dash to come into the meta. But yeah, now... No good, sorry. Unless you're expecting 60% of your field to be Cindra's, Auroras, and Prisms. Unlucky.
So I think that's all the dark horses we had, Hayden, unless you want to add anything else.
No, I just wanted to quickly touch on 2 of the big things we haven't spoken about. Actually, we can probably answer a couple more real quick. Maybe they aren't dark horses, they may be more outsiders. Verdance?
Cope. Verdance is Cope. Oh my god, I was spectating this testing game. All right, these are against 2 really good players, like high-level players, like they've both made World's top 8 kind of thing. Verdance against Aurora. Verdance, turn 0, Ring of Roses.
It's pretty good.
Aurora, first 5 turns is just bricking. Isn't able to convert 5 cards for the entire first 5 turns. First Arc Lightning the Aurora sees was turn 12. Verdance still got blown up. Like, it's just that matchup is so horrendous. I struggle to see a big reason to play Verdance, especially when you consider Aurora being the top deck of the format. I think Verdance just feels like a sitting duck, and then Aurora combos you, and then you die.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wishy-washy on Verdance. I think it's a cool hero. I want it to be good, but it just feels ultimately like not quite a good enough mid-range deck with the combo plan. Florian? You feel the same about Florian?
Similar, yeah.
It's got the same problems.
Yeah, it's like the same thing. It's like these Earth heroes. Like you're just sitting ducks and then you get blown up. Like, okay.
I don't disagree, to be honest.
Oh my god, the other thing that happens in these matchups, like I was talking about, like the Aurora was breaking against Verdance. What happens is that because your deck is so defensive and you really need to resolve your rootbound carapaces to start being online, it turns out the aggro deck bricking was bad for the Earth hero too, because then the Earth hero couldn't get Earth cards in the yard and couldn't decompose more and couldn't play the D-reacts. And then it was just like, oh, okay, you're just...
Yeah, like, they don't care. They're like, oh, you had a bad turn, but actually I can't punish you for it. This is terrible. I think Florian can do that a little bit better, but yeah, it's pretty bad for Vincent. Just quickly, we spoke about Vincent. Ira, like Ira's one that's we just put up some gameplay of it. It's interesting, but is Aurora just too much better for it?
Ira's absence from this past weekend's results did stick out to me as slightly confusing. I think your gameplay video showed it, right? I think Ira is favored into like Cindra, but I could see Aurora's fridge and Aurora's like potential to combo just maybe not being good enough for Ira, because like while Ira has like a Phantom of Blues, she's still not great at blocking Arcane. She's not great at dealing with the combo.
Yeah,
and also she's not that fast. She's not like as fast like Cindra is, for example, where you really like entirely strip the Aurora's armor as soon as possible. So she's a little bit slower, which means Aurora just has a bit more time to find the good hands, to find the CLVs and catch back up on value, like with your mask. Where I could see perhaps that's why she's not great into Aurora, and that's maybe why she's a little bit of an outsider for this meta.
Okay. Marionette, do you think what is the Aurora matchup like for Marionette, and do you think Marionette has a place in this meta then? You've been high on it.
I think Marionette's matchup spread reminds me a lot of KO. We brought up KO so many times. But their matchup spread reminds me of KO at PTLA, where I feel like I'm 45 to 55 into everything.
Yeah. Okay.
Like I sit across an Enigma, I'm like not happy about it, but I'm like, this is totally a game I'm able to play. Like I'm not. This is not a lunch matchup. I play against like an Aurora or a Cindra. I'm like, I feel like very like in the 50-ish range, and it feels like it really comes down to perhaps capitalizing on my opponent's inexperience, maybe into Assassin or Marionette in particular, or just catching them out on the way Assassin like does. Right, they play around one thing and they guess wrong, and you just get the thing. So I feel like Marin is a sort of hero where if you're a sort of player that really likes to play a flat matchup spread kind of deck, I'd be on Marinette, which is, I mean, this is how play I am. So yeah.
Let's talk about two of the most prominent heroes in the format of the past year. Let's talk about Nu and Enigma, because we haven't touched on them a lot, honestly. So let's probably wrap up with this, but where does Nu sit right now in terms of this meta? It was, I mean, if I look back to this last week's results, it was the number 4 deck in terms of results, 7 wins. Traditionally a pretty bad Aurora matchup, right? So yeah, where you spoke about Nu briefly, you spoke about CYB, I think, but where does Nu go next? Where is this in the format?
Nu is such a big question mark right now because of the variation in her builds. We already spoke a bit about how Marinette can be built very, very differently. I think Nu is like that, but like X2. There's CYB Nu, and then there's Damage Nu. And Damage Nu also has different flavors within it. Like I'm seeing like Hunter's Clave packages in Nu, like more and more, and that's like a totally potential viable option. And again, they all like different weaknesses and different strengths. And I'm actually very curious of these new builds that we saw like win these past few RTNs, like the past few weekends of RTNs. I'm very, very curious like what those different Nu builds are, and like are people having success with CYB Nu? Are people having success with a Damage Nu? Like what's going on? And I think that's a big strength that she has, where you sit across a Nu and you don't know what version they're on, and that you just automatically lose some points into it. Like for example, an Aurora sits across a Nu, and if the Aurora is still playing Poison the Well, it's like you bring it in, and then they're not CYB Nu or the Damage Nu, and then you're really, really sad. Or you don't bring the Poison well, and they are CYB Nu, and they really, really punish. So she has a bit of that edge. Nu, I think, is the biggest question mark for this matchup for me right now.
Interesting.
Do you have thoughts on Nu?
Nope, not really. To be honest, I'm interested to see where it goes next. I think, in theory, it probably... I just feel like it... Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about it. My thought would have been that if they're not playing CYB, they're just too much of a dog into Aurora for it to be relevant. But maybe that's not the case, to your point.
Well, the Hunter's Clave builds, like the damage Mark Nu builds, actually do a surprising amount of damage. And the interesting thing about the Mark stuff is that the number of disruptive turns has also gone up if they're also on like Mark of the Black Widow. So, and also that those extra disruptive turns also hand disruption. It's not arsenal disruption. Which makes a big difference because we spoke about how Aurora is like resilient to like hit. A big thing is that she can put an instant in her arsenal, and then your CNCs and your leap no witnesses don't do anything because they'll just let it hit and then play it out. Whereas the hand disruption stuff like Mark of the Black Widow, they can't get around with their instance, and that's relevant. The other edge that Nu has over Marinette into specifically Aurora is the interaction with electromagnetic somersault, where Nu will. Like, if you can't somersault, you can't get the defensive side of somersault against a stealth attack ever against Nu. Because Nu will just banish them before your somersault resolves and you lose them forever. And that is actually massive. There's so many times where I've seen people do that line against a Marinette, and I'm just thinking, oh, if they were a Nu, the Aurora just cannot do that. You cannot block 6 on the bonds and bounce your cards back.
Yeah.
And I think that is a relevant piece.
Okay, cool. Talk about Enigma just briefly. I mean, the thing that I can never get over with Enigma is I think it is just so powerful that I think that like illusionists consistently be in the format. There's a reason for it. They're powerful. They do something that is disruptive to the general flow of combat in the game. They get to utilize their hands in such creative ways a lot of the time. Now, I do think Enigma has some challenges with the blues that it has to play, right, that kind of limit that sometimes. But I do think Enigma is just so powerful that I think it's going to have a spot. You can build Enigma to be good against these aggro decks. I don't think you can build Enigma to be good against all the aggro decks, and I think that is going to be the challenge. So there might be a case of like, as Enigma, you say, I'm giving up X, but I think Enigma can't not be a part of the format because I think it can be built in ways to combat at least a chunk of the format and like a vast chunk of the format, and I just think it's so powerful that it's going to do it in ways that other decks just can't. Even if it feels on the surface that it might be a bit of a weaker option than, say, something like Zen into that piece of the meta, or even like Vincent or Warrior or whatever. Like, Enigma's just so powerful that it's like, I should probably just do it with Enigma.
I think Enigma is really strong too. And I do want to point out, as far as aggro decks to be at the top, Enigma is probably happiest with a Runeblade being the top, rather than a Runeblade semi/ninja, kind of what Aurora is, rather than actually a ninja like Cindra or Zen, because Aurora is just more bricky. And I think Enigma is happier with that being the top aggro deck of the format, to your point about how I think she is still viable as well. I also want to point out something that people were experimenting with very early in Enigma days, which I wonder might make a comeback, is Essence of Ancestry Body, the red one. Because I could see that potentially
that card's insane.
Yeah. I could see that card being very, very annoying for the Auroras and the Cindras as well, and just give Enigma a bit more of that edge into those matchups. And then we know she has auto wins in many other places. So
I don't. To be fair,
I agree with you. I think she's strong. Yeah.
To be fair, I don't think that card is messing around with. I think that card is almost a staple in Enigma. Like I have looked at lists for so long and not understood why people have not played that card. Like the card is ridiculous. It was the best card in our deck. I was so surprised when I saw Gregor's list from Worlds that he was not playing that card, because that card was the best card in our deck at Worlds. I was so surprised about it. Yeah. Anyway,
for CYB Enigma, I could see it, but I think some Enigmas that I've seen have moved towards the CNC Pummel route a little bit more. Like they want to play those cards, and that's the way they want to tackle the aggressive matchups. And I think if you are on that sort of plan, I could see the Essence of Ancestry being difficult to fit in, because you also want your Phantasmaclasms, which are just really good. Actually, that's the other thing. Coming back to Aurora being the top aggro deck rather than the ninjas, Phantasmaclasm can sometimes completely wreck Aurora.
Yeah, it can.
in a way that happens less regularly against Cindra. Still obviously could, but a lot less regular. Whereas Aurora, it's like, oh, that's your one starter. Get it out of here. Aurora's bricked. So Enigma, I mean, if you want to play those kind of cards, then I could see Essence of Ancestry being difficult. And maybe that's why you're seeing less of it.
I want to play the good cards. I don't understand why people.
I mean, CNC Pummels.
CNC
Pummel are good cards.
Yeah, okay. Sure, but they're coming at the expense of good cards that are synergistic with your deck, as opposed to cards that aren't synergistic with your deck. Like your Pummel is terrible if it's not with the scene. Like Pummel, like it's doing a 4 card play to like pummel a Phantasmaclasm, for instance, is like, you've probably just taken so much damage or lost so much on the offensive end to do it. Anyway, it's what it. Essence of Ancestry Body, though, is an insane card. I think the challenge for Enigma is that if you want to beat the aggro decks, you have to pick which kind of build. So I think you can pretty easily, honestly, target the ninjas, but your deck has to look so different, and you give up so much against, for instance, Nu as well. So you've just got to like pick it. I think if I was going to do it right now, I build my Enigma deck in a way that's really good against the Assassins and Aurora. I think they overlap, honestly, with what that looks like, and is just generally good into the rest of the format. But you probably got no shot against Cindra, honestly. And I mean, that is what it is. And you're probably gonna have a tough time against even something like the other ninjas as well. But it's
so interesting you bring that up, because I have been seeing builds of Enigma again, similar. They're going down the CNC Pummel, they're going down the sort of aggressive route, and then they're putting these blues in the deck, which me as new makes me so happy. They're playing second tenant of Chi Wind, and they're playing Blue Enigma Chimera, and I saw Enigma play that against, and I was like, oh, I'm so happy you're bringing that in. I'm so glad these aggro decks exist, that you feel like you need to put these cards in your deck, and you can't side them out because your blue ratio just tanks. And then I'm like, sweet, I will steal those cards and play them against you.
I feel like such
to your point.
Sorry. I just feel like such an Enigma elitist. Like, I'm just like, I look at these lists and I'm like, these lists are so bad.
Relatable. I feel the way about Assassin many times as well.
It's the way it is. I think probably just lastly, if we just look ahead to the next 2 weeks, we've got Calling Kobe next weekend. We've got Sao Paulo the weekend after. Those are the two big events. There's some Battle Hardens dotted around. Obviously, PT's in a month. But let's just focus on those two. What are we thinking? What are we expecting? So I guess after all this discussion, we had this question of, does the format breathe and respond to Aurora, or does Aurora continue to just dominate because it's just the best deck? What do you think happens?
I think Aurora is going to dominate. I think at least for like the first, at least for like Kobe, for example, I think Aurora is going to dominate. I think this is an interesting time where I think people are starting to wonder that if someone's discovered tech for Aurora, should they be playing it at these events, or should they save it for the PT? Which is often a double-edged sword, because you're like, I want to save it for the PT, and you surprise people, but it may not be as good as you thought it was, and then you kind of get juiced, and then you end up feeling like, I should have just played Aurora instead, because this tech didn't end up being that good because I was just playing it with my small testing team, and you know how that goes sometimes.
Whatever.
So I'm just gonna go. I think the safe answer is just Aurora's just gonna dominate.
Okay, I'll take the flip side then. I'll say that at Kobe we see 2 or 3 Auroras in top 8, but we see a good shift in response. And then by the time we get to Sao Paulo, I think we probably see the same, to be honest. I think Aurora probably being still the best deck in the format, but people coming... The format starts to adapt. I think we'll start to see a bit more rock, paper, scissors as opposed to just the scissors of Aurora cutting through everything else. And I think we'll start to see the rock show up in the forms of these, the victors, for instance. Even I think Zen to an extent is that rock, right? And then I think we'll see the response of that with things like Enigma come back a little bit. So yeah, be interesting to see though.
Yep, I think that could happen.
Cool. Well, that is episode 203 of Arsenal Pass. We dissected everything when it came to being an aggro-dominated meta. We spoke all things Aurora replacing Viserai. It's going to be an interesting time. There's only 4 weeks left. We're on the countdown now to PT London, so we're going to kind of be looking at what the landscape, the battlescape's going to be in these next few weeks and really starting to get a good handle on it. And then we'll be predicting whether we think there's going to be some surprises by the time we get to London. I mean, to your point, right? Are people already starting to hide stuff? Probably. It's always interesting to me whether that tactic works out, right? Or honestly, whether it just comes up because someone else found it and they're not going to PT London, but they are going to, call in Kobe, for instance. So, yeah, always very interesting, Pankaj. I want to say a massive shout out to Arsenal Pass patrons. Also, make sure to go and check out some of our additional content. We've got replay analysis up, of course. We've got gameplay coming. Another gameplay will be dropping a day after this pod lands. Plus, we've got a couple more in the series coming your way over the next week or so as well. So make sure to check out that. But until next week, we'll see you in the next episode.